Hello, this is Truth Be Told Transformation, and I'm your host, Bonnie Burkert, sharing tools for transformation to live your highest truth. So I ask every week, what would that highest truth be? The way to find out? Really, I mean, what makes you happy? What's going to make you bright? What's going to make you shine? The way to find out is really tuning in and listening to the inner voice, the intuition. So I've invited today a gentleman to come and talk to us about, he's an intuitive coach for one, so he's going to help us in that way. But what it's really like to live your life as a psychic and what one can do in society to help with that gifted knowledge. Welcome, Robert Lindsy Milne.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Hi, Robert.
How you doing?
Robert's coming to us from Toronto, and
yes.
We were doing a little warm-up talk, and he got his start so early in life, already reading as a teenager, doing readings, psychic intuitive readings. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, I started working at a tea room when I was about 15 and a half, and I was homeless at the time. I was living on the street. And I always knew that I was psychic. And from the early in my life, I not only knew I was psychic, I survived by, my intuitions and awareness. I also gave and did psychic readings for people even when I was quite young. And I heard, this was in the wintertime, I heard that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room in Toronto, in the daytime, doing tea leaf and card readings, you would get a sandwich, a cup of tea, and some cookies. And then you get paid at the end of the shift. And if you worked the night shift, you'd get a hot dinner, cookies and a cup of tea, and paid. And I applied there. The way I got the job was I did a reading for the owner of the tea room, Mrs. Cox, and I got hired that day, and that started my career. And I worked at the Cozy Tea Room until I was about 21 years old, and I worked there 5 days a week, sometimes 6, sometimes 7 days a week. It was at an early age my life purpose.
Wow, that's just incredible. And I'm sorry to hear that you were dealing with homelessness, Robert. That's rough. I mean, especially up in Toronto. So
it was, yeah, and this was the wintertime. Well, one of the things that was really significant is my awareness, my skills and ability were honed on the street, and I survived on the street by my instincts and awareness. And throughout that time, whenever there was a problem, like when I was on the streets, whenever there was a problem that I needed to sort out, I was always had the option of doing something psychic or intuitive or something illegal or immoral. I almost always chose using my psychic ability. There was no right or wrong choice. But the choices I made had a big effect on how my life turned out. And I almost always used the intuitive and psychic way. But, a child in the middle of a blizzard on the street sometimes has to do things to stay alive. And there was no way out other than, I couldn't use my psychic ability there. So that was on a few occasions, but not that often. When I was on the street, and it wasn't horrible at all, and I see it as my training ground, my basic training.
Yeah, indeed.
And I wouldn't change it.
Wasn't Eckhart Tolle homeless at one point as well? I mean, it's just...
I'm not sure.
Do you happen to know about that? No, it's just, it's interesting that you went through that hardship, and you really did have to live by your instincts. Well, yes, in fact,
that's right.
Very much so. Now, but you were young. I mean,
yes.
And I mean, it seems that young people, I can't even imagine that you knew to trust what you were hearing and getting, the hits that you were getting.
Okay. We have to go back a few more years to that then.
Okay.
So when I was around 9 years old, my father took me to a semifinal Stanley Cup game. Boston and Toronto were playing, and my dad was a big Maple Leafs fan, which made me one too. And we were at the game. The series was tied 1-1. And the game was at the end of 3 periods. It was still 1-1, and the score was 1-1, and they went into overtime. When the teams came on the ice for the first overtime period, just stretching, I knew number 17 with Toronto was going to score. I knew it. There was just no question. The game hadn't started. Anyway, the referee blows his whistle, and they send the regular players off, and the first line's ready. They turn the lights down in the building, and the entire building of Maple Leaf Gardens, so like 18,000 people, and was silent. Just as the referee was about to drop the puck, I couldn't hold it inside anymore, because it went from he is going to score to he already had scored. And the game hadn't started. And I jumped up and started to yell and scream and cheer in that building that was silent. And the entire building, 18,000 people, turned and looked at me and my dad. and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Sit down." And I did. And then anyway, the referee drops the puck. By the way, number 17, Gary Eamon, wasn't even on the ice at that point. Anyway, the game starts, and I'm looking around the building, realizing nobody knows he's going to score. And then a couple minutes later, Eamon jumps over the boards and skates down the ice, and a guy named Red Kelly passes the puck to him. Eamon tips the puck into the net, and the entire building just erupts, and yelling and screaming and flash bulbs going off. And I was just looking around, thinking, I'm different, and that was when I knew.
It's really confusing. So you basically were in a future moment.
It seemed like it's so. Yeah. That's right.
Yes, I'm trying to understand how this could work. And you hear about people having these experiences, and they're different dimensions almost, right? And the time continuum, everything that is, past, present, future, all in one, right? And
yes,
it's definitely kind of mind-boggling.
Interestingly, the way I do my work now, and I'm 73, I'll be 74 in July, and I've as I said, I've done this full time for 58 years. I've had more than 100,000 psychic connections in my lifetime. And at this time in my life when I do readings, because I still slave over the hot crystal ball, a few days a week as well, and I don't read a crystal ball. I just have one. I was just joking, right?
But you can.
Yeah. So at this time in my life, when I tune into somebody, I see their life from conception to completion, and now I don't see the details of conception or completion. I just sort of see the energy line. I know where it is, and I follow it. And when I'm doing readings for people, I'm moving forward and backward in time quite consistently, regularly. And when I'm giving bad news to somebody, and you have to do that, right? And so what I do is I look forward into the future, and I look to a point, and I tell them about the positive result of the negative experience I'm going to tell them about. And what I do is I look back, and in time, I see the event. So when I'm doing the reading, I'll just drop a little hint, little tiny one, and then change the subject and talk about other things in the reading at other times. And then I'll come back and then make it a bigger, I'll say something bigger, bigger. And then I'll talk about something else. And sometimes I'll take a half an hour to give that information. And by the time I'm giving that information, they already know it's going to happen, and they also know the end result.
Yeah. It's interesting. As somebody who's doing reading, that does readings for people, and you were doing readings again as a young person,
Yes.
Not right. I mean, it sounds like you just kind of jumped right into it. You didn't really have
just like that
mentoring or anything like that. You worked with how you felt, and I understand that people, nobody wants to hear bad news, but it's sometimes, I'm sure it's interesting to hear how you handle it. You basically warm them up to help them, to help them have an understanding of where how this could come through. So,
and the goal is to have them prepared so that they can make the best of the situation.
Yes.
And when I'm also doing a reading, sometimes in readings, I'll go into the future, like say somebody's going through a really terrible period right now. What I'll do in the reading is I'll move forward, and let's say they're 40. I'll stop when they're around 80 or something like that. When I get to that point, I will look back through their eyes when they're 80 and describe to them how they've solved the problems that they're going through right now.
That's beautiful.
And it's really a healing thing.
Very much. And that's really what you're here to do as a counselor, as a healer, right?
That's right.
Therapist?
That's correct.
Do we refer to you?
Well, I'm not a licensed therapist. I do intuitive life coaching. Yeah. And when I'm working with people in intuitive life coaching, it's an intense fast acting type work. We get to the problem. My concept and belief is you find the root of the first injury and you heal that.
Right on.
And then from the root of the injury or the trauma, when you heal that, the rest falls into place.
Excellent. So
you get to the root and kill the root. And that's where I do in my life coaching. And it's fast and I focus a lot on making sure that people understand saying what they mean and meaning what they say. And I help people understand the way we say something is very, very important. And because everything that we say, we're saying to ourselves. So when we are saying something, we need to make sure we're saying it in the right way.
Be impeccable with your word. Yeah, I agree with you fully. And I wanted to ask some of your areas of influence, some of places that you study or people that have been inspiring to you through these years. Who have you read? Like, who are some of the... Who are some of your favorites, spiritual thought leaders?
I really don't have any of those.
Yeah, then
I'm not very much of a follower, and I'll tell you one thing. I'm also not a leader either. I haven't spent a lot of time hanging out with other psychics. I'm really not that interested, or haven't been. I've just been interested in, what I was doing with my work and my concepts. Now, I'm not a snob or anything like that. I've just always been independent.
I'm definitely not taking it that way. I think it's just that I would say the reason I asked that question is that I've had a lot of interviews, and there's guests that come with different disciplines, right? It may be Wiccan or different spiritual paths. And so I just wanted to ask what yours was, but yours is your very own unique path. So how do you...
My focus is giving service.
Yeah.
And I completed grade 8 in education, and I had a lot of trouble in my early years. I didn't learn to read and write until in my late teens. And I didn't have the awareness to consider what was going to happen around the world, or to understand math or things like that. What I've always been focused on is giving service to the person in front of me, and that's been my focus, and that's all I can do is take care of the person in front of me. I can't change the world. I can't feed the starving. I can feed the person in front of me, and that's my focus.
Excellent. So how has it evolved? You told us about the early days. You were a little kid, and
yes,
the information was just coming through. And then you had the hardship, but you did find you landed at a good place. It was the perfect place for you
sure.
at the time to have a community and have people that knew
sure.
that they could find you. So how is it evolving? How did you hone your skill?
When I was, at the tea room, they did 10-minute readings.
Okay.
At the tea room, and as I said, many times I worked 7 days a week. I became very committed to doing this work. And when I left the tea room, I was around 21, and I was pretty close to my 10,000 hours at that age. And as a kid, I was doing readings for people my age. It was quite amazing. And the experience was you just can't get it now. So I heard that when a young man becomes a priest, he makes a vow to say a mass every day of his life. And I thought that if I'm going to do this work, I decided that I was going to make a commitment, a vow. And the vow was, I vowed that I would do a psychic reading or practice being psychic or doing psychic readings every day of my life. And I made it for a little bit more than 30 years without missing a day of practice.
Incredible.
or a day of work. Yeah. And it was a discipline. It was that.
That's great. No, and I really admire that. I study yoga, and I'm not the kind of yogi that can do the splits or any physical yoga, but it is truly that tuning in. And even at the very least, it's just every day, it's that sort of opening mantra that celebrates the divine connection.
Sure.
I love that.
Sure.
Every day.
And I've been, from the time I was about 16 or 17 up until last February. Okay, so that's a pretty long time ago. I have been in some type of therapy or healing. Inner healing my whole life, not with the same therapist. There's been I've done a huge amount of therapy my whole existence, since 16 or 17, and I graduated from therapy since last February. So this is the longest I've ever been in my life since 16 that I haven't been doing some specific type of inner work.
So you feel okay right now? You feel like you don't need to, or
no? I just feel I made it. I graduated.
That's good. And now you can have that much more time to share. Right. So let's talk about some of the other experiences that you've had to help people along the way. Now, do I understand correctly that you've done some work with the police?
In a couple of ways.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
One with the RCMP security service, and I had direct contact with the KGB agent, and then another time. This isn't quite as glorious as with the RCMP, but one time when I was just starting out, you see. A big part of my career after I left the tea room and got settled and had developed a practice, I also started traveling, appearing on radio and TV shows, and I was the first Canadian first person in Canada to tour Canada, appearing on radio and TV shows. I was the first guy to do that, and other people do it now, but I was the first Canadian, and so I was often away touring, and in the early days, I wasn't making a whole lot of money, and there were times when I was going on a tour, but I hardly had any money at all. So there's this little town north of Toronto. It's called Barrie, Ontario, and I would go to Barrie, Ontario as my first stop, and it's only about 70 miles, if that, from Toronto. And I would drive up there in the morning, check into a motel, go to the radio station there, CKBB, do an open line call-in show, and then say, if you'd like to have a reading from me, call me at the Bayshore Inn. And then when the show was over, I'd, run like hell or drive like crazy back to the motel, answer the phone, do some readings in the evening, and then the next morning, and then go back home. And that gave me the cash for the next city, and it would be farther away. And then eventually I'd make my front money to, get some plane tickets to start flying even farther. One time at the Barrie Hotel on that trip, there was a knock at my door, and it were the two Barrie police officers. And in those days, in fact, up until July 1st, 2000 and either 18 or 19, doing psychic readings was against the law here in Canada. And it was under the Witchcraft Act, Section 326. And it stated anyone who fraudulently, because it was considered fraudulent if you did it, tells fortunes for a consideration, gives advice using an occult or crafty science, practicing medicine using an occult or crafty science, and there's another one I can't remember, but it was 4, is punishable by a summary conviction and not more than $5,000 and not more than 1 year in jail. Oh, and that law was enacted in the late 1800s.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And
so
it was still in play in 2018?
Not anymore. Not any. Yeah.
That was 4 years ago.
Right. That's right. And incidentally, our Prime Minister Trudeau, on the same day, he legalized fortune telling and cannabis. I don't know what the connection could possibly be, but they both happened on the same day.
This is grand. So go ahead. So let's go back to, I could take that down that path and I'm incredulous right now, but go ahead. So tell me what happened. What were the police going to do? Okay, so they knock on my door and I open the door and there's your 2 cops there. And they say, we'd like to talk to you and we want you to do something. And it was getting later on in the day. And I said to him, well, I'm doing readings and I don't want to work with the police. And they said, well, we won't let you do readings if you won't work with us. Oh, right. And I said, okay. I needed the bread. I needed to pay my hotel room the next day, right? I needed to when I checked out. So I said, okay, I'll do it. But let me do these readings and then come back at 10 o'clock. And they did. And they took me down to the station and they told me the story about this woman. I'm not going to tell you her name. They told me the story of this woman, and it had made the news in Toronto too, by the way. And she was a really wholesome young mother, super responsible, super considerate, just an all-round decent, healthy young mother, and of course married. One day she had a couple of days. One time she had a couple of days off from her job, and she wanted to go to the hairdresser. She took her son to the YMCA for daycare. And she drove to the mall to go to the hairstylist. And the hairstylist was right at the front door of the mall.
they found her car there. She never made it to the hairdressing appointment, and nobody ever saw her again.
Oh, no.
And these police officers were working. Well, all of the Barrie Police Force was, because they probably only had one missing person in a year. It was not a big city at that time. Anyway, they took me down to the station, and they told me that story, and they wanted to see what I could do, or if I could, and I said to them, well, regardless of what we do tonight, we're not going to find her tonight. In fact, this was before, this would have been like maybe November or October of the year. And I said, you're not going to find her or her remains until around April. And so we looked at maps, and I looked at the maps in the area, and I felt a couple of spots where there was energy. And I said, you will find her near an abandoned railway trestle, and it'll say 1910 on it. But you won't be able to find her until April. That night, we went out into the fields looking in the dark and stuff like that, but we didn't find her. And the next day, the Barrie police also went looking, and they didn't find her. And it wasn't until April of that year they found her. But what they got really blown away by was when I described the train trestle in 1910. And it was at that point that they were taking me seriously, because they saw the 1910 and they went, whoa, what's this about? Wow. And they found her remains right near that area. They found her remains.
That's a rough story, but check you out. You were so accurate. And I mean, it's really, I feel it would be an honor to be able to help in that capacity. So how did that feel for you? Well, I guess you couldn't really, because you had to be operating under the radar. I mean,
I didn't want to, I never have been busted for that. Well, actually, I've never been busted. I've never been busted under the Anti-Witchcraft Act. Well, and I have never had it to be a problem. Through my whole career, it was just something that they could have used, and I knew about the law. Not that many people knew about the law. It was obsolete.
I see. Well, that's good, and I'm glad. And they it's not like they were going to rough you up, but they decided to talk you in. Sure. That was their way of talking you into it.
That's right. So now, I had never done anything like that, really. I'd had a little practice, but I then I got curious and see if I could do it as well.
Okay, and did you continue? Were there other
I have done several over my career, but I very seldom ever talk about them because I don't want to do that kind of work.
Well, fair enough. No, I understand that.
I don't have the character. Most times when a psychic gets called in a missing persons, they're dead.
Right.
And I don't have I'm not sure what it is, but,
it's like you don't,
for me, I'm not able to comfortably tell somebody their child's dead or their mother or their I'm just it's not something that I could do in a healthy way for very long.
We're going to go back to what you said before. Sure. You're here to help people, and that's your mission. Yeah. So now you've done, but let's talk about that in terms of health and healing and medical. So you've had some experiences in that realm as well?
Yes. I was involved with helping to find a cure of the most potent superbug on the planet. It was 100% antibiotic resistant. And if you got that superbug, you died. That was the prognosis. And I helped find the cure. Now, I'm certainly not the star of the show, but I was involved in it with some of the most brilliant minds on the planet. A client of mine from many, many, many years ago. She's been a client for at least 30 years. And I can tell you her name because she's written a book about this. She first came to me for a reading. She had graduated from the U of T with her PhD in epidemiology. Her name is Stephanie Strathdeep. And now Stephanie is a professor of epidemiology at the University of Southern California, and she's also associate dean of epidemiology of that university, as well as she works at the place where they do all the infection stuff, the famous one in the U.S. And she's renowned around the world for her work with AIDS. Stephanie's husband, Tom, is several years older than her, and he's a great big mountain of a guy, like 6'5". He's a professor of experimental psychology, and he has a PhD in psychiatry, and he's a professor at that university and associate dean, and as well a learned and great scholar. As I said, he's about 6'5", and he reminds me of an old Indiana Jones kind of guy, because he did lots of stuff in the field. And one time he got kidnapped by the Sandinistas and was held, and he just about starved to death. And he's lived this kind of wild, crazy life, but as a professor. Tom had ballooned up to well over 300 pounds in his older age. And I was doing a reading for him, and I said to him, and I did the usual way of giving bad news, and I said to him, in such and such a time, and in 15 months or 2 years from now, I can't remember the exact time of that, you're going to be more than 100 pounds lighter than what you are. And I talked a little bit more about that. And then I said, however, and first of all, I said to him, you won't want to wear the clothes that you're wearing now, because you won't like the way they fit. They're going to be loose, and because you're going to lose more than 100 pounds. So then I said, there's a problem in your abdomen, and you are, before I talked about the 100-pound loss, you're going to get so sick, you could not get any sicker and still live, and you're going to lose more than 100 pounds. And then I said to him, I'm thinking that the destiny for you is to lose the 100 pounds. So I'm also thinking that if you get really serious and, get your diet and act together and lose 100 pounds, you're going to miss the illness.
Okay.
Or you're not going to heed what I say, and you're going to have the illness, get as sick as you possibly can without dying, and lose more than 100 pounds. And I said, Tom, you can do it the easy way, or you can do it the hard way. Now, that was spread out over time. I'm not that brutal. Well, sometimes I could be, but not very often. The person really needs to have a sledgehammer, between the eyes. But I'm really not like that. I spread it out. So a year or so later, Tom and Stephanie go away on one of their dream vacations to Egypt. And when Tom was leaving, he wasn't feeling very well. In Egypt, they were touring the pyramids. And when he was in the pyramids, he collapsed and was taken out. And they went back to their hotel. And then the doctor came, and Tom was really, really sick, and they took him to a hospital in Cairo. And at the hospital in Cairo, he contracted the superbug.
Yikes.
Over time, a short amount of time, he was medevac to Germany. Stephanie contacted me. Now, I've been in touch, I've been friends with these people as my clients as well. And Stephanie called me. Well, I talked to them before they went away even. And Stephanie called me when she was away. And it was near Christmas. And I was, oh man, I had the flu that Christmas, or a cold. I was just feeling awful. And I heard my Skype ring. And I crawled out of bed, and as I got to my computer, and I answered, and the first thing I said to Stephanie is, "What took you so long? I've been waiting to hear from you." Incidentally, that's in the book, by the way, and that's what I said. What took you so long? I've been waiting for you. And she sort of told me about Tom, and I said he's not going to die, but he's going to get really sick. And from that point onward, I had a mental link with Tom when he was in a coma. And I knew what was going on with him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I lived that for a little 8 months. And I knew what was happening with him that much. Stephanie was watching over him. And I said to her, "You have experienced everything that you need to know to find a cure. You've done this in other areas, and you can do this now." And when I told her that, she decided that she was going to find a cure for her husband's incurable illness. And he was in a coma for 8 months, and he went into septic shock 7 times in that 8-month period. And Stephanie created a group of scientists around the world that got involved with finding the cure to this disease. All the while, I knew what was happening with Tom. I knew where he was at. And there was this one way that I did some, had some visualization kind of tools, instruments. I imagined a candle, a lit candle. And when Tom's life force, his energy was strong, the flame was strong. When the candle started to flicker, I knew something was going on. And this one day, the candle looked like it was going to blow out. And it really shocked me. And because that candle blows out, that means Tom dies, or Tom's dead. And again, he was in a coma. And Tom could hear people speak around him. And he could hear them say things like he was dying and things like that. He didn't know where he was. He was really sick. He was hallucinating, but he was hearing, and he was letting go. And I said now I had a meeting with Stephanie every day during that time. So I said to Stephanie, Tom is cold, scared, alone, doesn't know where he's at, and he needs to see his girls. He needs to see his family really soon. Yesterday would have been a good day. Today's a good day. Tomorrow's not so good. If you wait longer, please just don't bother. And that night the girls arrived. And it's Germany. They flew from Southern California, and I knew immediately they arrived because candlelight started to get stronger and stronger, and they arrived, and when Tom sensed his children around him, they were in hazmat suits, nevertheless, but when he sensed them around him, it gave him the strength to live. Now, the thing that's really important, Bonnie, not that I did it. What's really important is that a psychic did it. And because these two brilliant people, Stephanie and Tom, are academians, and when they write, they included the work a psychic did.
Yes.
And this work that a psychic did proved that when people are in a coma, they can hear.
Okay. Yeah.
What's going on. Right. And if a psychic, not just me, because I got the call. It was my turn. It was my, it's like in the union hall and my number came up. I got that job. That's what it was. That was my luck. But there's a lot of people on the planet that could have done it differently, but as good. And so I share this, and it is a psychic has proven that. There are two other episodes that were similar as that.
Well, that's incredible. And how does that make you feel in terms of how to be of assistance, to be of service out there?
It's my purpose.
Yeah. Right.
No, seriously, it is my purpose. Now, besides the, I do readings and I do life coaching and stuff like that. I also am around a lot of accidents or a lot of injuries or a lot of emergencies. That happens to me a lot. An example was a few years ago. I was going to my dentist, and my dentist was at Queen and Young. My office was at Bloor and Christie, right across the road from Baskin Robbins, by the way. And I, instead of driving through the city, I chose to take the subway. And I got on the subway, blew a car all the way. I would have all the way across the Yonge Street, get on Yonge Street, take it south to Queen. That's where my dentist is. This day, I don't know why, I just got on the subway, and instead of going to Yonge Street, I decided to stop at an earlier stop called St. George that went eventually to Queen Street, but there were 5 or 6 extra stops, and most people wouldn't have done it that way. I don't know why I did. I just did. I got off the Bloor train, and I went downstairs to the north-south trains. And as I was getting to the bottom of the stairs, there was a subway train on the platform. There was, it was getting ready to leave. And I kind of ran up to the doors, and I saw that the doors were going to close, and I just stopped. And when I did, this woman came running beside me and in front of me and stepped to the doors. And as she put her foot down on the train, it closed on her foot. The doors closed on her foot, and the train was getting ready to start. Right. She was standing right in front of me, and I just bent down, put my hands around her shin, both hands around her shin, and I pulled her foot out of her shoe. And then I pulled her back a little bit and let go. And as the train started moving, this woman's shoe was bouncing between the platform and the train. And so she started to bend down again to pick up her shoe. And as there were spaces between the train cars, and as she was bending down to get her shoe, when that space was there, she started to slip and fall forward. And once again, I just was behind her, and I put my arms around her waist, and I grabbed her, and I pulled her back. And when I was pulling her back, and the train was leaving the platform, leaving the station, I heard another one come in, and I looked over my shoulder, and that was the southbound train, and that was the train I wanted to be on. And the train that I, pulled, was standing in front of was the northbound train, and I didn't want that. So I just let go of her, and then I went across the platform and got on the train and went south. And about 2 or 3 stops later, I said, "You just saved her." Yeah, very much. That happens a lot.
Yeah, no, it's really, really true. And I mean, you're obviously a person that has been living your entire life highly attuned, and that could be, I'm sure that's probably a whole nother episode of how challenging that could be at times, right?
It's not
into things.
A gift. It's an awareness that compensates for my perceptual disabilities.
I see.
So I'm not like a normal person, and I got this great talent. I have some pretty severe perceptual difficulties, like reading and writing is one of them. And I've also carry around a considerable amount of early childhood trauma, as well as in older, mature PTSD as well. So it's not a super extra Superman human. It's it is compensating for my lacks in other ways.
How very interesting. And it's certainly a takeaway for others to understand that and really have a holistic look at what a life like this would be. So if you had a tip for somebody that to hone their psychic abilities, what might that be?
Do it. Practice it.
Okay.
Every day.
Right.
Here's what I teach in a class. Now, by the way, I'm going to be teaching a psychic class. First time in 20 years, by the way. So, anyway, here's what I tell people. Become aware of what's obvious. When you become aware of what's obvious, then more becomes obvious. Mm-hmm. When you become aware of what's more obvious, then more becomes obvious again. And as you gain that awareness, eventually you get to a point of what's obvious to you, but it's not obvious to other people. That's the first steps of being psychic. So Excellent. What you do, if you're going to do a reading, are we running short of time?
No, I'd like to hear your thought, please.
Okay, so what we do is, and I say to people, look at the person in front of you. Look at them, see them. Don't like gun them down with your eyes, but just become aware. See how they sit. What's their face like? What kind of clothes? Just look at what you can see. When you become aware of what's obvious about them, then it expands, and then expands and expands and expands. And when you identify where they're at and you just start talking about what you're seeing that's obvious, it'll expand, and you just allow the words to come through after that. And that's the first steps in being psychic. And because everybody, well, not everybody, almost everybody can be psychic. If you think of a bell-shaped curve, at one end of the spectrum, there is one person that has absolutely no awareness. And then at the other end of that bell-shaped curve, there's one person that's absolutely 100% psychic intuitive. And the rest of us fit somewhere in between.
Right.
So most of us have that awareness.
It's probably moving. It's probably,
Absolutely.
in and out and
Absolutely.
Where you're at in life. And I mean, that's
Absolutely.
the mission of my show, is to really help people open up to a higher
Yes.
consciousness and in the different
Yes.
ways. And I mean, and also introduce somebody like yourself that can help people that are going through, what an opportunity to work with you. And I look forward to finding out more about your class. Please tell us your website.
My website is www.robertlindsymilne.com. You can also find me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Can you believe it? TikTok.
You're doing TikTok. All right, Robert. Good for you. And you do have a podcast as well.
It's on My Side of the Crystal Ball, it's called.
My Side of the Crystal Ball. I like that.
Yeah. And again, you can find it on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, UK Paranormal Radio, and wherever else you get your podcasts.
Fantastic. This has been very enlightening, and I really look forward to learning more about your work and possibly even working with you. So let's keep in touch.
Wouldn't that be
a
privilege?
Robert.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is grand. Thank you so much. And everybody, this has been Truth Be Told Transformation. I'm Bonnie. Remember that Tony Sweet is live every Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. Pacific. So come and ask him some hard questions and meet his guests as we continue to explore the paranormal and all its many dimensions. Please also know Robert Hensley's got a show on Mondays, the Minuteman Report. That's also live. And upcoming, we will have a festival. It is called the Parapod Festival, and it's going to be happening on April 1st in Santa Clarita, California, not too far away from here. So please search out Parapod Festival for more information on gathering with the conscious community here in the Los Angeles area. We thank you for listening, watching. Your likes, your shares really help us spread the word as we try to make people live their highest and best lives. Until the next time, namaste.